Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard about it. Now you're going to see about it. Nancy Pelosi has decided to step down. She will not run for re-election for Democrat leadership. Now, she would have been running for minority leader since Republicans have taken back the House. She has decided not to do that and bow out gracefully. So let's listen to that speech.
Scripture teaches us that for everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. My friends, no matter what title you all, my colleagues, have bestowed upon me, speaker, leader, whip, there is no greater official honor for me than to stand on this floor and to speak for the people of San Francisco. This I will continue to do as a member of the House, speaking for the people of San Francisco, serving the great state of California, and defending our Constitution. And with great confidence in our caucus, I will not seek re-election to Democratic leadership in the next Congress. For me, the hour's come for a new generation to lead the Democratic caucus that I so deeply respect. And I'm grateful that so many are ready and willing to shoulder this awesome responsibility.
See ya. So she is not going to re-seek Democrat leadership. Now, let's hear what people had to say about this. I want you to hear the discussion here on ABC News, because they talk about Nancy Pelosi's accomplishments, so to say, and they also talk about her past. And there's something that I do want to show you. So I want you to listen to what they say here. And then I want to show you something, a good old gem from the past of Nancy Pelosi, to show you how much she has changed. And I think you need to pay very close attention. Excuse me. I think you need to pay very close attention, because what you're going to see from her past, it's kind of reminds me of AOC her first year. And it's going to show you how people can change. Go ahead and hit that like button, guys. That helps me with the algorithm. Let's get doodle.
I mean, she's a hugely consequential figure in American politics. The most influential and powerful Speaker of the House in modern times. The Speaker of the House twice, obviously the first woman to be Speaker of the House. But when you look at the last two Democratic presidents, Barack Obama and Joe Biden, the major pieces of legislation that each one of those presidents can lay claim to, big both in terms of dollar amount, obviously, but also in terms of reach and influence on American society, from the Affordable Care Act under Barack Obama to the infrastructure bill, the efforts to deal with the COVID vaccine. These are hugely consequential bills, and I think it's safe to say that that maybe none of them get done in the way they got done if it weren't for Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi was the person as the Democratic Speaker of the House that pushed those pieces of legislation through. Big New Deal style pieces of legislation that in each one of them, and Kira, you and I both covered the back and forth on all of that. That there were moments of doubt whether each one of those bills would pass, and it was Pelosi who got it over the line.
I don't know why they call it New Deal style, because it didn't. If you look at the New Deal, it didn't come close to that. So that's the impression. She's being praised by a lot of people. The women at The View were acting like Nancy Pelosi passed away or something, the way that they were talking about her and singing her praises. But I want to show you something about Nancy Pelosi, because he talks about progressive legislation. And I saw multiple clips today where people were like, yeah, she really was progressive and she really was a fighter, right? Was she? I'm going to show you a speech from Nancy Pelosi. Now, this is from 1993. So this would have been under the Bill Clinton administration. Here's a clip of Nancy Pelosi on single-payer health care. Listen to what she says here. You tell me if this is the same person.
Know how to do it right with single payer the first time.
And now Nancy Pelosi from San Francisco.
Thank you very much, Congressman McDermott, for holding this press conference and for your leadership on the single payer proposal. I remain a staunch and ardent supporter of the McDermott-Conyers bill. I am very pleased with the president's presentation last night. I'm sure others this morning have told you that he made an excellent diagnosis of the problem, and now we have to get on with how we take care of providing health care to all Americans. My problem with the president's proposal, if there is a problem, is that one of the principles of universal access, one of the principles of the single-payer bill is universal access. The president has accepted some of the principles of the McDermott legislation, be it universal access, no precondition, portability, you know, the list goes on and on. But for access to be universal, it must be affordable. And my concern is that at 150% of poverty, a family would have to start paying for its 20% share of the insurance, may not make it affordable to many of the families whose needs it hopes to address.
This is September 23rd, 1993, and this was on C-SPAN. This is under Bill Clinton's administration. And in this speech, you hear Nancy Pelosi saying that even Bill Clinton's policy that he wanted in reference to the healthcare situation didn't go far enough. That it wasn't affordable to those families that are working class or poor that couldn't afford it. Let's go on.
There is already a concession on part of the federal government that a family needs food stamps if they're at 185% of the poverty level. If we admit that people cannot feed their families at below 185% of poverty, how then can we expect them to pay for access to insurance at 150% of poverty?
You see how people change? Where's that Nancy Pelosi?
I think the president has is on the right track. I think the closer he moves toward the single payer, the better. As I've said before, I hope that this plan, and when I say hope, I mean that I will join with my colleagues here in working to see that the plan that the Congress passes contains as many of the provisions of single payer as possible, that it does not foreclose on an eventual single payer, and that it does not throw up obstacles to states easily establishing their own single payer. Once again, I want to commend.
Did you hear that? Let's hear this part one more time. This is important. I want people to really hear what she's saying here. Because I just want to remind people, because, you know, some people don't have good memory all of a sudden, but listen to this.
If they're at 185% of the poverty level. If we admit that people cannot feed their families at below 185% of poverty, how then can we expect them to pay for access to insurance at 150% of poverty? I think the president is on the right track. I think the closer he moves toward the single payer, the better.
The closer he moves towards the single payer, the better.
Said before, I hope that this plan, and when I say hope, I mean that I will join with my colleagues here in working to see that the plan that the Congress passes contains as many of the provisions of single payer as possible, that it does not foreclose on an eventual single payer, and that it does not throw up obstacles to states easily establishing their own single payer. Once again,
that it does not throw up obstacles for states easily establishing their own single payer. Guys, this was 1993. Even back then, they were already talking about single payer on the federal level and the idea of states passing their own single payer. Guys, this is not new. This is what I want people to understand. For people who are trying to do this now, right? For whole Washington trying to implement this, trying to do this through the state of Washington, right? Trying to get single payer healthcare for people in Washington state. For people who were trying to do cow care in California, although that was struck down because big money came in and all that kind of stuff. For people trying to get this to happen in Massachusetts right now, well, what I want you to understand, this is not new. This was discussed back in 1993 on national news. But yet, people today who were around back then, like Nancy Pelosi, they want us to feel like we are crazy for wanting Medicare for all. What happened to that, Nancy Pelosi? You see what I mean? The same people who called Bernie Sanders radical for wanting Medicare for all, where were they? Wasn't Joe Biden in office around this time? Nancy Pelosi was in office around that time. So what happened? Why were they acting like Bernie Sanders' idea was so radical when this had already been brought up before?
Again, I want to commend Mr. McDermott and Mr. Conyers for their leadership on this. Thank you.
So we'll have to look up. I do want to look more into this because I want to look more into, I didn't have time today, but I want to look more into McDermott. I want to look more into him and Connors. And I want to try to find that bill. So McDermott and Conyers bill and find out what happened to what happened. That Nancy Pelosi reminds me of someone like AOC. Nancy Pelosi was progressive once upon a time. And the longer she stayed in office, the more establishment she became, the more corporate she became, the more watered down she became. Pay attention to that. What you just saw right there, that was like a 1990s AOC. And you see what Nancy became. Now, they're already talking about Hakeem Jeffries' possibility of taking Nancy Pelosi's spot. Let's hear what they had to say about that. Now, again, shout out to Case Study QB for this clip as well. They are talking to Ro Khanna here about this situation. Let's hear what he had to say.
How much could your party change without Nancy Pelosi at the helm?
Well, first of all, she has been one of the most consequential people in American politics. I mean, she's someone who saved our economy in 2008 when Paulson came begging to her for the stimulus. She got the Affordable Care Act passed. She stood up against the war in Iraq. She has gotten the biggest climate package. She's historic, and she is extraordinary at the politics. So it's filling the shoes of a giant, and it's an extraordinary loss that we're going to feel for many years to come.
Hakeem Jeffries, who could very well replace Pelosi, shares her willingness to keep far left factions in check. Are you concerned?
So, to keep far left traction in check. Hakeem Jeffries, poised to succeed Nancy Pelosi, would make history. So here's the thing. They want someone to come into her spot to keep the far left in check. And what that tells you is that Nancy Pelosi was also keeping the far left in check. But just remember what I just showed you, the clip prior to this. Nancy Pelosi at one point was on that far left. So in order to move up in these positions in Congress, you got to sell out at some point, bud. You got to sell out at some point. At some point, Nancy Pelosi said, no, we're not going to try to fight for single payer health care. No, we're not going to try to give the people anything, but I'm going to have refrigerators full of ice cream. That's the thing. In order to move, at some point, you have to sell out somewhere. That's how you get to move up. So they want to bring in Hakeem Jeffries so he can keep the progressives in check too. You see how this works? You see why I keep telling you the squad isn't going to be able to get anything done? Because the people in the leadership positions are still there to check their power. So as long as you have those people in those positions, how are you going to get, you're never going to get Medicare for all. I'm sorry, but we need to be realistic here. Some of you may not want to hear this, but let's keep it real. Ro Khanna told you so himself when he came onto this show. If you don't have a president and a Congress and a Senate that wants Medicare for all, you're not going to get it. All three have to agree. Even if the president wants it, Congress can veto it. So they want to put somebody in her spot to keep the leftists in check so that the progressive policies don't move forward. So I ask this question again. At this point in time, what is the point of having them there? The best chance that they had to really fight back and really stand up was to hold their vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. They missed their moment. They blew it. Let's go back in.
At all what this could mean for progressives. It's a big tent party, and she was successful at keeping that tent together. Not easy.
She was. And at the end of the day, look, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, and the American Rescue Plan, and progressives voted for all of them. And so I think that the narrative that somehow the party is disunified is not true. We've actually been very unified. The party that doesn't have unity is the other side. I mean, that's
the Democratic Party has become unified because the progressives have folded. You see what I'm saying? You see, the progressive, they put all their cards out on the table and then they fold. That's the reason why the Democratic Party is unified, because the progressives had to cave in. It wasn't the other way around. It's not like the corporate Dems said, okay, yeah, we're going to listen to you guys. No, they are unified now because the progressives caved in, and because the progressives, some of them have sold out and they decided not to push progressive policies anymore. They don't want to defund the police anymore. They don't even talk about it. They're not allowed to mention it. Where was all that? That same rhetoric that they had when Donald Trump was in office. Then all of a sudden Joe Biden wins. Now we can't talk about defund the police. You see how this works? As if all of a sudden policing got better because the president is a Democrat? That's the problem that we have. So they're unified because the progressives caved in. That's why they have unity. They weren't supposed to have unity. The Justice Democrats were not supposed to unite. They were supposed to rise up and take over the party. So he's letting you know they got unity. That means they ain't gonna never fight for us.
The honest case. And look at, as you pointed out earlier in the show, all they're talking about is Hunter Biden. And Stephanie, I want to say something. I never attacked, in the 4 years Trump was there, a single person in Trump's family who wasn't in the White House. I went after Jared Kushner because Trump said he's in charge of Middle East peace. But I didn't go after random nieces and nephews. Hunter Biden has nothing to do with government. He's a private citizen, and it is cruel that they're attacking him after all that he's been through in his life. And that is, I think, the modern Republican Party. It's cruelty. And that's what's so frustrating to many of us.
So Hunter Biden is not allowed to be criticized because he went through things in his life?
Then on that very note, I'd like to give you a preview of what Marjorie Taylor Greene herself is thinking about focusing on in the days ahead. Watch this.
I can tell you right now, my district, Georgia 14, is not interested in continuing to fund a war in Ukraine and defending Ukraine's border while our border is being invaded every single day.
You sit on the Armed Services Committee. How much of a battle is there about to be?
Well, that's just highly irresponsible given Putin's bombardment recently of Ukraine and the human rights violations. But we're going to have the votes, and Putin should know we'll have the votes to pass President Biden's aid package to Ukraine, both in the lame duck, and there are Republicans who are going to continue to fund the war. So fortunately, Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't speak for the American public.
Magically, he can tell you that they're going to have the votes to fund another country, but they can't seem to come up with the votes to help people in this country. Thank you for the super chat, Roger Meadows. Please, whatever you do, Sab, don't show the views reaction. I wasn't going to show that one. I know you guys hate the view. Bill says AOC will be talking about this again now that the GOP has the House. They talk like this when they are in the minority party and there is a working class discontent. This is the playbook. That's right. Like Rome said, it's easy to appear to be a leftist when the Republicans are the ones in power. Jay Tolbert, she got corrupted. The money talked, period. Yep. Somebody gave her a hell of a lot of ice cream.